Everyone, viewers, welcome back to the Global Strategic and Defense News. Today on Candid Conversation, we are going to discuss a very important topic, and that is why Africa matters in global geopolitics. For the last many few years, we have been hearing about the rise of Africa and how the three superpowers are trying to make inroads in Africa. So this is probably, I felt, the opportune time to discuss the role of Africa in global geopolitics. And for that, I have been very privileged to have a very esteemed persona who is, I would say, one of the eminent voices on Africa. And she is Shivangi Rajput. Uh, she has done her B.Tech from the JC Bose University, Faridabad. She has done a master's in political science from the Indira Gandhi National Open University. And she's currently doing a doctorate from the Department of African Studies, University of Delhi. So we are indeed honored and blessed that such an eminent persona has, spared her valuable time to come and enlighten us about the role of Africa in global geopolitics. Welcome, Shivangi, to the Candid Conversation on the Global Strategic and Defense News.
Thank you so much, sir, for introducing me in such a nice way. And thank you for giving me the opportunity to speak on the platform. As I am currently pursuing my research scholar P.hD degree from Department of African Studies, I think it would be a very good opportunity for me to speak on the topic of Africa here on this platform. Thank you so much for having me, sir.
Welcome. Shivangi, my first question is that since around what time duration has Africa started mattering in global geopolitics, and why so?
Okay. It's a great question. And I am afraid so the answer of this question is not just a simple line answer, but rather a very bit complex answer. So the importance of Africa in global politics, it's not just an overnight process, but rather a gradual rise of over the centuries. I'll be answering the what time period and why part together in this coming discussion, and let me break down this question simply. So the time period which is significant for the Africa rise is broadly divided into three periods. First is up to the mid 20th century, second the later 20th century, and the 21st century. So many believe that Africa started getting importance in the late 19th century, but no, we all are wrong here. I would like to remind everyone that Africa is considered as the cradle of civilization, and this is the place where humankind originated. Africa is not just important for African subcontinent, but to the whole world. And Africa has always been important. But if I have to come down to the history timeline, so from the ancient times to the 21st century, I will describe it. So we know about powerful kingdoms such as kingdoms of Zimbabwe, kingdoms of Aksum, kingdoms of Mali and Ghana, which were famous for their trade across the Arabian Peninsula, Indian subcontinent, Mediterranean and European region. So we can imagine the influence these kingdoms must have had across the world politics at the ancient times or in their relative time. Things began to decline for Africa when colonial powers such as Britain, France, and Portugal arrived to explore and colonize the continent. This time period, all we know is called as the colonization era. In this era, the famous transatlantic slave trade, in which millions of Africans were forcibly taken to work as slaves on sugar, cotton, tobacco plantations. So even before this was like a mark of the colonial legacy which they had during the colonial period. And even before the full-scale colonial invasion, there was another form of slavery was taking place in the African subcontinent, and that was called as Indian Ocean slave trade. Though it was smaller in scale and less intensive than the transatlantic slave trade, So in the Indian Ocean slave trade, the Africans from the African subcontinent were transported to the Indian subcontinent. And what I'm meaning to say here, that through these slave trade, a massive outflow of people occurred, with Africans being transported across various regions. And in this way, during this time, Africa became deeply connected to the rest of the world, not only just shaping global economies, but also influencing the political dynamics across the world. Next next time, which I've discussed it as the post-colonial era. The story begins where over 30 countries gained independence from the colonial powers in the 1960s decade. These were the powerful moments. Nations that been controlled for decades or even centuries were suddenly free to make their own decisions. Several African nations, they came together and formed one organization in this time period, which is called as OAU, the Organization of African Unity. And this organization is considered as a precursor of AU. It, at the same time, when the nations were gaining consciousness, the same time only the Cold War was also taking place. And this was the time period when it was at its peak. So the country, US and both Soviet Union, they were trying to prove themselves in Africa. So which helped them try to gain influence by supporting different regimes or movements. So even back then, in the post-colonial era, Africa was involved in global politics, but more as a field of competition rather than being a decision maker. So the real shift in the African policies has come around the 1990s. More countries started moving towards multi-party democracy, end of apartheid in South Africa, which was around 1994, and the leadership of Nelson Mandela. This leadership not only inspired millions across the continent, but also reshaped how the world view Africa, which is not just which is no longer just a victim of history, but as a region capable of deep transformation. Now, I will talk about the 21st century, that how 21st century and what are the reasons and why the reasons are significant of the Africa importance in global politics. So the change started in Africa in the early 2000s, and many African countries began steady economic growth, with some even becoming fastest growing economies of the world. Countries like Nigeria, Ghana, Ethiopia, Kenya, they saw growth in different areas like agriculture, services, telecommunication, fintech, and other sectors as well. Africa has also a lot of valuable minerals. The countries like Congo, the DRC, they have the large amount of minerals with them. And this was also a time period when African Union was created in 2021. So the things begin to reach new heights in the 2020s decade. So from the 2020s till today, I will be speaking about that. So why Africa started gaining momentum in this decade? Because the Africa is located in such a geopolitical position that it has access to almost all the important trade routes, such as Indian Ocean, Suez Canal, Mediterranean Sea, and Atlantic Ocean. So the big powers like US, China, France, Japan, they all have established military bases and security partnership in countries. A big example, as we can see, Djibouti. So along with that, Africa is also emerging as the next major consumer market with over 1.4 billion people, which are attracting global companies for the investment, for selling purpose, and for the innovation process. Demographically, the continent has the world's youngest population, and even today, with over 60% of its people under the age of 25. Along with that, the Africa is also called as the battery of the world. It has a huge huge scope or a huge chance of providing renewable energy sources. So Africa was no longer just seen as a continent that helps. It was starting to seen as a partner in solving global problems. These are the reasons, and all these reasons are enough to explain the importance of Africa in the global politics in the current scenario or the present timeline, and we can rightly call it as a whole world is looking towards Africa for the prosper and the peaceful future ahead.
Very interesting points you have made, Shivangi, and I totally agree with you. The way Africa shaped out, really, the entire world is now looking towards Africa. I think it is a great thing to have happened that a continent like Africa has emerged totally on its own by the dint of the hard work of the African people. Very well analyzed. Uh, my next question to you is that out of the three superpowers, Russia, China, and USA, which do you feel one of these have made the maximum inroads in Africa?
Okay, so when we talk about the biggest inroads or influence of the these three global powers in Africa, we are looking at the three different countries. Every country has its own approach, has its own ideology, has its own style of doing it. But if we are talking about who has made the biggest inroads, the clear answer is China, and that too by a huge margin. Well, China's presence in Africa is incredibly strong and it goes far beyond just trade. Let's talk about numbers for a second. In 2024, China's trade with Africa reached an impressive $295 billion, which is a 6.1% increase from the previous year. That makes China Africa's largest trading partner, and it if you ask the trade is balanced, no, it is not. The Africa has a growing trade deficit with China due to fluctuating commodity prices. But what's really interesting is China's strategic investments in Africa. Under its Belt and Road Initiative, China has built key infrastructure across the continent. For example, China has built the railways in countries like Kenya and Nigeria, ports in Djibouti and Tanzania, highways in Ethiopia, and it's not just about the road and bridges. China has built national parliaments in places like Zimbabwe, the Republic of Congo, and these projects are shaping the economic landscape of Africa, which is also improving regional connectivity and boosting trade across the continent, but along with the political landscape of Africa also. And when we talk about Russia, to Russia, strategy is more focused on military and political influence. The trade between Russia and Africa is relatively small, about $24.5 billion in 2024, but Russia is making its mark through security partnership with countries in conflict like Mali, Burkina Faso, Central African Republic, and they even provide military support through private groups like Wagner Group, which is like disbanded now and has been replaced by a new group called Africa Corps. So Russia, through these partnership, it actually secures access to valuable minerals like gold and uranium. Now the third superpower, the US. So technically and historically, the US has played a big role in Africa, especially through development aid, health programs, and counterterrorism efforts. The US African Command, AFRICOM, has been involved in military partnerships and peacekeeping across the continent. The trade with Africa stood at around $113 billion in 2023. But on top of that, what we are seeing today that US has been scaling back in certain areas, due to which the trade has come down to around $71.6 billion. Why? Because they have recently cut up to like 83% of their global programs through USAID, which we have heard about. US has also pulled out their troops from the key areas like Niger, which is also raising question about its long-term commitment to the region. So, if I have to summarize this whole conversation, I would say China is leading economically with its massive investment in infrastructure, trade, and natural resources. Russia is growing in terms of military and political influence, particularly the countries which are facing instability. US is still relevant, especially in development and health initiatives such as HIV/AIDS, but is pulling back from some areas. So, all in all, China is the winner here.
Well, I totally agree with you. The kind of phenomenal inroad China has made has actually stunned the whole world, the way it has gone around in not only Africa, but every possible country, I think. And I totally agree with you. US pulling back and especially, shutting down that US aid was a big strategic and diplomatic blunder. This was giving them a lot of soft power in Africa, which I think, they've done a great mistake by shutting down US aid. Beautifully brought out. Shivangi, my next question to you is, how do you rate India's inroads in Africa when we compare to the three superpowers that we just discussed so well?
That's an excellent question. And honestly, I think India's journey in Africa is one of the most inspiring and underrated stories in global geopolitics today. So, while the big powers like China, US, and Russia have been making loud moves, India has quietly been building deep, meaningful partnership across the African continent. So, I will break it down. So China is everywhere in Africa, building roads, bridges, ports, railways. And if there is a shiny new airport or highway, chances are it is backed by China through its Belt and Road Initiative. And that's huge. Russia focus has been more military. It does not have much economic or people-centric presence. And when we talk about US has been big on development and security, but as I have discussed it, that it has been cutting a lot of their aid. Now, here comes India with a totally different style. We are not dropping billions in loans or setting up military bases. Instead, we are saying, let's grow together. That's really resonating with African countries. For example, take education. India offers thousands of scholarships through programs like ITEC, ICCR. Many future leaders and professionals in Africa have studied in Indian university. And our PAN-E network project connects around 48 countries through tele-education, telemedicine, giving people access to high quality learning and healthcare without leaving their country. So that's true development. That's impact at the grassroots level. Then there's this healthcare. India's pharmaceutical companies like Cipla, which have made life-saving HIV drugs affordable for millions in African. Uh, we all remember actually during COVID-19, India sent vaccines and medical aid to dozens of African countries. Even when we were like under pressure at home, that kind of solidarity creates long-term trust. In technology and business, we are not just helping, we are collaborating. Bharti Airtel is one of the biggest telecom players in Africa, connecting millions to mobile and internet. And in renewable energy, we are working through the International Solar Alliance to bring clean, affordable solar power to rural Africa. Yes, I agree with that trade with Africa, which is about $100 billion in 2024, is less than China's, but we are growing steadily. More importantly, we are building trust. African countries know that when India shows up, it's not about taking control, it's about sharing, it's about knowledge, building skills, and respecting local priorities. And let's just not forget that India was there during the anti-colonial struggles, supporting African nations fighting for independence. That sheer history has its own bonding. Today, we continue to support Africa's push for representation at UNSC, and we have already hosted like three India African summits showing our commitment. Even in security also, India isn't sending its troops for domination. We are sending them for peacekeeping. India forces have served in South Sudan, Congo, Liberia, and helping to maintain peace and protect civilians under the UN flag. So now, where I think India made a landmark move was at the G20 summit, which held in 2023 in New Delhi. So India played a very important role ensuring that African Union or AU was made a permanent member at the G20. It was a clear message from India that Africa deserves a seat at the table, and India will stand up to make sure that happens. So while the world sees Africa as a place to compete, India sees Africa as a partner. Our approach is quieter, maybe less flashy, but it's human, it's respectful, it's deeply appreciated. And personally, as a research scholar of African studies, I find it so encouraging that India is offering a model of collaboration and not control. And that could make all the difference in the years ahead. It's
Well, exactly. I mean, very good words you have used. It is a collaboration and not a control. And the punchline which you said, India's investment in Africa comes with the word trust. And this word trust is a very phenomenal, thing which you have told. And it was a great learning to also hear about the tele-education and telemedicine which India is doing. And I totally agree with you. It is what you said in the beginning, that it is underrated because probably we have not publicized the way China has done. So I think, we need to go a little more aggressive on the good work we are doing, because it is not only important to do good work, it is also important to show the good work that you're doing. Shivangi, my last question to you of the show is, uh, how do you visualize Africa's role in global geopolitics in the next 2 decades?
um, in the next 2 decades, I would say Africa is not just going to be a part of global geopolitical conversation, it's going to reshape it. For a long time, Africa has been seen primarily through the lenses of poverty, conflict, and foreign aid and whatnot. But the narrative is changing fast. We're entering a phase where Africa is positioning itself as a strategic player, not just a passive player in great power competition. So let's begin with demographics. I would state some of the data related to demography. So when we talk about demographics, it is a game changer. Africa is expected to have a 2.5 billion people by 2050, and by then it will account around 25% of the global population. But more than just a size, what matters is the age profile. By 2035, Africa is projected to have the world's largest workforce, surpassing both China and India. And that's not just a statistic, that's a global engine for growth, innovation, and change. When we talk about the Africa's GDP, so in 2023, the Africa's GDP was around $3.1 trillion. And according to African Development Bank, it's expected to grow at 4% or more annually over the decade. Several countries like Rwanda, Ghana, Senegal have consistently been among the world's fastest economies. And with the implementation of African Continental Free Trade Area, Africa is becoming a self-sustaining economic bloc. Strategically, as I have told earlier, that Africa's location holds tremendous geopolitical weight. Around 30% of the world's maritime trade passes through African waters. The Suez Canal alone handles 12% of the globe trade. And with rising tension in the other regions, the Horn of Africa, the Indian Ocean Corridor, these paths or these regions are becoming critical for military and shipping routes. That's why we are seeing, like, you take name of any power, like, Russia, Turkey, US, France, China, all have military bases or their active missions in Africa. Just take an example of Djibouti. Djibouti hosts both US and China bases, something which you don't see anywhere else in the world. Then this is a very next is the very important factor, the resource factor. The DRC, like the Democratic Republic of Congo, supplies 70% of the global cobalt. The South Africa has the world's largest platinum reserves. And the countries like Zimbabwe, Namibia, Zambia, these are emerging as major players in lithium and rare earth metals. It's no exaggeration to say that Africa is holding the keys to the global energy transition. Diplomatically, like Africa voice is getting loud. In 2023, like as I've talked about, the African Union joined G20 as a permanent member. There is increasing demand for permanent African representation at the UNSC table. Africa's already marks up nearly 28% of the UN member states and contributes more troops to UN peacekeeping operation than any other region. And when we talk about in terms of technology, Africa has experienced a digital boom. As we have talked about demography. So demography is a very important factor, and it is a hub for the innovation. So over 500 tech hubs now operate across the continent. And countries like Nigeria, Kenya, Egypt, they are leading in fintech and mobile innovation. I will give you one example. There's this one thing called M-Pesa in Kenya, similar to our UPI, which has revolutionized mobile payments not just in Africa but as a global model. And even McKinsey report said that Africa's digital economy could reach around $712 billion by 2050 if current growth continues. So Africa is also offering an opportunity to lead on climate solution and sustainable development. Innovations in solar energy, smart agriculture, climate finances, these are already emerging from African countries and they will become more globally relevant. As a research scholar, I would like to add one special dimension here to this question. So, as we know that Africa was colonized, and for centuries it has been viewed through the lens of outsider. But today, these old narratives are being broken. A widespread process of decolonization has begun. We are living in an era of constructivism. We are decolonizing everything. We are questioning everything. We are questioning every narrative, any false propaganda which has been spread by Western powers towards Africa. So the decolonization is happening not just politically, but across areas, across society, across literature, across education and governance. And as a result, when the decolonization has been happening, the truth is getting at the surface, and as a result, African voices are becoming louder and clearer in expressing their demands. The continent is no longer seen merely as a receptor of ideas or aid, but as a collaborator or equal partner on the global stage. Africa is becoming stronger than ever before, not only the resources, but potential, but in confidence, leadership, and vision. And when I visualize Africa's role in global geopolitical, I see a continent that is no longer defined by what it lacks, but why what it offers. It is a place of talent, resources, innovation, strategic decision making, and it will be helping the world to lead it.
Right. Very rightly brought out, Africa, the way it has shaped up, the immense potential it has. Definitely, it is going to play a pivotal role in the global geopolitics in the times ahead. Viewers, I'm sure that you must have, learned a lot because I personally learned a lot. There were many things which I was not aware, and it was a great, insightful session. And like I always request viewers, please like the show, forward the show, subscribe to the channel if you haven't, and most important, give your comments because your comments help me decide the way forward for the channel, and they also help me understand what more shows would you like on what diverse topics. The comments are the most important. And thank you so much, Shivangi, for the great insights you have given, for the wonderful points you have made. and for sparing your valuable time to come on the Global Strategy and Defense News. Thank you so much once again.
Thank you, sir. Thank you so much.